Gilligan's Island was meant to be a carefree diversion, a humorous comedy with castaways, coconuts, and comical accidents. However, a far less benign event was taking place behind the scenes of palm trees and staged laughing. For many years, one of the show's most adored actors remained silent. She was very gorgeous, grinning from ear to ear during interviews and waving to her devoted supporters. However, she had insight that others lacked. Furthermore, perceptions shifted as the truth ultimately came to light. Although filming may have ceased quite some time ago, the story itself continued indefinitely. Keep watching because Dawn Wells' decades-long lie will shock you. Questioning me about drugs, sex, religion, and interracial marriage became an immediate priority for me. Your parents have no authority over you when you're a kid. Millions of people fell in love with Dawn Wells the moment she played Mary Ann Summers. Nice, humble, and incredibly sweet. As a charming opposite to Ginger's glitz, Mary Ann was the popular girl next door. Many were captivated by Dawn's charisma, but few understood the depths of her inner turmoil. Dawn was still trying to establish herself in Hollywood when she was cast, in contrast to some of her co-stars who had already established themselves with huge film credits or Broadway reputations. Although she appreciated the chance, she soon realized she was not being treated fairly. Press coverage, promotional materials, and salary were all areas where she was underappreciated and unrecognized. The network frequently promoted Ginger as the show's face, despite the fact that viewers loved Mary Ann. Dawn has a private complaint history. Throughout the run of the performance, she never once flubbed a line, failed to deliver as expected, or even cracked a smile during an interview. Years later, though, she did confess that the silent torment of being unnoticed had worn her down. Mary Ann was the show's beating heart, she claimed in an interview, but the producers were reluctant to acknowledge it. Glamour was the only thing that mattered. The media's constant comparisons to Tina Louise were an even more excruciating blow. It was the press's obsession with Mary Ann and Ginger's feud that did more than damage, it was inflated and damaging. For a long period, it was more prominent than her actual work. Ginger or Mary Ann is now a running joke in popular culture. However, for Dawn, it served as a constant reminder that she would never be considered first-rate, regardless of her efforts. She frequently felt lonely away from the camera. As the youngest and most inexperienced member of the cast, Dawn felt herself withdrawing within herself as the others developed their own habits and routines. In retrospect, she realizes that she kept quiet about her feelings of isolation. Not even with her closest friends, yet Dawn persisted through the pain. She had faith in herself and the show's potential. She knew that Mary Ann had a special place in people's hearts, and she was resolute in her determination to give the audience her all, no matter the cost to herself. That, however, was merely the first stage. The media's obsession with stoking rivalries obscured the fact that, behind the scenes, tensions ran much deeper and more personally than anyone had anticipated. The rumored rivalry between Mary Ann and Ginger had progressed beyond mere media speculation by the time Gilligan's Island premiered its second season. Even the staff could sense the mounting tension between Tina Louise and Dawn Wells. Behind the scenes, a far less lighthearted affair was taking place, as fans argued about who was more beautiful and who had the finer costume. When Tina Louise came on the show, she was clearly presenting herself as an actress who takes her craft seriously. With a background in acting and experience in feature films, she felt her character, Ginger Grant, deserved the spotlight. Audiences seemed to be more drawn to Dawn's friendly charisma, which allegedly made Tina feel betrayed. Cast and crew members say that Tina resented being in the background and wanted all the attention for herself. In contrast, Dawn was really looking forward to getting along. She tried to break the ice multiple times, all the while admiring Tina's professionalism and talent. But no matter how much I tried, nobody cared. Tina seldom interacted with her co-workers and instead retreated into herself, even during filming breaks. In order to avoid any needless interaction, she would sometimes depart the set right after filming her sequences. There was no way the two actresses were more different from one another. Dawn was a joy to be around, she was always happy to meet autograph seekers and talk to their children. Unless the cameras were rolling, Tina would remain reticent and formal. Behind the scenes, that dynamic was breeding animosity, even though it appeared to work on film. Subtly, the remaining cast members took sides. Dawn was more often backed by Bob Denver and Alan Hale Jr. than Jim Backus, who took a neutral position. However, behind closed doors, a number of crew members felt that Tina's demeanor was the root of the problem, and the team was beginning to fracture. It was accepted as a rule of thumb. Unless it's absolutely required, keep the two ladies separate. Dawn played it straight when confronted with a question regarding Tina Louise years later. "I tried," she confessed. "I did, in fact. Unfortunately, not everyone is interested in being buddies. Respecting that is essential, no matter how much it pains you." Though the icy separation was the beginning, that well-phrased remark stated more than most people understood. When Dawn finally admitted that she had trouble getting along with more than just Tina, the rift between them became a symptom of something far larger. Every member of the cast had their own hidden agenda, and things were going to get even more seedy behind the scenes. The set was far but a tropical paradise, despite the public's perception of a humorous sitcom including coconut radios and slapstick humor. The Gilligan's Island Ensemble was suffering with emotional fatigue, off-camera power struggles, and conflicting egos beneath all the laughter and palm fronds. Dawn Wells and Tina Louise weren't the only ones affected by the conflict. It appeared all over. The guy behind the charming Gilligan, Bob Denver, would frequently play the role of peacemaker, but even he had his limitations. He had strong relationships with Dawn and the captain, Alan Hale Jr., but he often clashed with producers over script quality and creative control. According to Dawn, Bob would respect his co-stars but annoy the writers when he refused to say lines that he felt were poorly written. Even when he wasn't on film, Alan Hale, who was famous for his deep voice and kind demeanor, was that. A moderating influence who sought to maintain a light-hearted tone while tensions intensified. Among the few cast members, he kept everyone's friendship, even Tina's, intact. Things were about to boil over regardless of his optimistic outlook. Jim Backus, who played the rich and eccentric Thurston Howell III, was the true unpredictable. On screen, he was endearing and silly, but off camera, he was notoriously erratic, particularly when he was drunk. A few of his crew members whispered that he was a hypocrite. Laughable and kind one second, savage and brutal the next. Word on the street was that he insulted his co-workers, manipulated the emotions of younger actors, and would sometimes appear unfit to work. Dawn took a lot of the heat because she was the youngest main character and because she was still relatively new to the industry. She refrained from openly shaming Jim. However, she did drop the suggestion in an interview that some of the actors seemed to take ownership of the set. She obviously wasn't talking about Hale or Denver either. Issues arose over seemingly insignificant details, such as the location of the dressing room or the sequence of billing in the credits. The set was confusing and dangerous at times. In spite of her upbeat attitude and professional demeanor, Dawn was perpetually dodging emotional landmines, wounded egos, and implicit hierarchies. Cracks were starting to appear. It was more than simply a sitcom, it was a pressure cooker. But another development was underway at the same time that the cast was falling apart and alliances were changing. Something personal was going on behind the scenes that almost broke the group, but no one knew about it at the moment. Nothing shook the Gilligan's Island set like a secret relationship that nobody dared speak about, despite all the drama and jealousy that went on behind the scenes. The tabloids never confirmed it. A formal announcement was never made. Somebody was going on behind the scenes, though, according to people familiar with the production. It went beyond a basic crush, too. It was early in the run of the show that rumors began. Bob Denver and Dawn Wells were quite close. Almost there. On other occasions, they were seen leaving the set together, sharing inside jokes and having intimate discussions between takes. Some thought the on-screen chemistry between them was more than just acting. However, the atmosphere behind the scenes became increasingly tense as the rumblings intensified. Their friendship was not the issue. It was because Dawn allegedly developed emotions for someone else on set. She was tight-lipped about who might have been vying for her attention, but hints surfaced in subsequent interviews and autobiographies. There were ripples that never reached the surface because of this unspoken triangle, but had an impact on nearly every member of the production crew. Dawn later acknowledged that some cast members dealt better than others with on-set crushes. Her tone suggested greater complexities, but she was careful with her words and never explicitly implicated anyone. She went on to say that in such a close-knit and secluded setting, sexual difficulties between cast members were more common than fans had imagined. The second season was when things changed, according to one ex-member of the crew. In the middle of a take, a few actors ceased speaking. Some people became possessive or envious when Dawn became too close to certain persons. According to sources close to the situation, there were times when Bob Denver appeared to be protecting Dawn in a manner that went beyond their friendship, even though he kept things lighthearted on camera the whole time. Regardless of the actuality, it led to resentment that was never entirely resolved. Coldness set into relationships that had previously been close. The forced smiles for the cameras started to wear thin. Real discomfort was lurking just out of view, hidden beneath the charming banter that made the show so appreciated. Most unexpectedly, Dawn appeared to be caught between the two. Nothing she did or said was ever out of line, and she certainly never promoted drama or trashed anyone. She tried her best to keep going, though, for she could feel trouble on the horizon. Without making a sound. Nonetheless, harm had been inflicted. Even after the performance ended, the underlying feelings of envy and animosity remained. The dysfunction went from being personal to financial, and it dogged her for years, especially after legal battles and betrayals. The cast of Gilligan's Island had no clue that the show would become a cultural phenomenon when it was suddenly cancelled in 1967. It became a television standard thanks to syndication, which allowed it to be replayed continuously in homes across America. Behind the scenes, though, a story of success swiftly turned into a painful lesson in Hollywood betrayal. Dawn Wells was among the people who took the biggest blow. Most of the cast members didn't make much money off of the reruns, even though the show was still quite popular. Actually, syndication payments were not part of the initial contract that the actors signed. Particularly for Dawn, who had poured herself into the part, it was a crushing discovery. Despite the show's ongoing success, she was unable to secure any financial stability, while television networks and executives amassed millions. Not everyone was invited to the table when decisions were made behind closed doors as the Gilligan's Island brand continued to develop through animated spin-offs, reunion specials, and merchandising. Even though Dawn was almost replaced during one special, she was left out of early negotiations for multiple reunion ventures. She battled valiantly for acceptance. The cast and producers' allegiance had clearly broken down, even though she retained her position in the end. Accusations of treachery were whispered behind the scenes. There have been rumors that several members of the cast cut corners in order to increase their own compensation or improve their billing. Upon reflection, she acknowledged being taken aback by the ease with which alliances crumbled when financial considerations were considered. The knowledge that a trusted co-star had negotiated better terms for themselves during contract talks at her expense was one of the most devastating things she had to face. She maintained her poise in public. She was never angry or confrontational. However, if the subject of royalty or cast links arose in interviews, a hint of melancholy would flit over her voice. Formerly, she compared us to a family, but then the business side started to dominate. The money problems, however, persisted. At the conclusion of Gilligan's Island, a new chapter began, one that would be plagued with inner struggles that nearly broke her, as well as public scandal and personal misery. Even though Dawn Wells had a rough time on set, she was unprepared for the difficulties she would face in real life. No matter what, Dawn Wells would always come across as merry and to the general public, positive, modest, and full of joy. However, there was a lot more complexity to the reality behind that image. The success that Dawn had after Gilligan's Island began to decline. She did stage performances and made rare TV appearances, but she was never the same. And behind closed doors, life turned into an uphill struggle that nobody saw coming. The arrest of Dawn in Idaho in 2007 after an ordinary traffic stop was one of the most stunning events of that year. According to the police, they discovered evidence of narcotics possession in her vehicle. The story went viral, and for a second, Marianne's innocent reputation appeared ruined. Dawn, however, denied being guilty. She admitted to being irresponsible behind the wheel and denied any involvement with the drugs, saying that the items were actually someone else's. The harm to her reputation persisted, though. This incident only skimmed the surface of a deeper conflict, which many fans were unaware of. I was already struggling financially before the arrest occurred. She had worked hard for decades, but her savings were minimal. As her acting jobs dried up, her income became erratic, and she had to covertly support her aged family members. A close friend of Dawn's started a GoFundMe page in 2018 after word got out that she was in such a financial mess. The objective was to contribute towards meeting essential living expenses and medical bills. They were shocked. How could someone be adored by so many? A woman whose image had been shown on screens nationwide for many years be confronted with such a crisis? Despite her initial embarrassment, Dawn eventually broke her silence after receiving over $100,000 in donations from friends and fans all around the globe. In an unusual statement, she expressed her gratitude to all who had helped and revealed how moved and touched she was by the outpouring of love. It was a rare occasion for her to open up about her struggles in public. Despite all that happened, Dawn maintained her poise. After leaving the island, she kept making appearances at fan events, where she signed signatures and shared anecdotes about her stay. According to her loved ones, though, the anguish was always there. Feeling neglected by the industry she helped shape, together with financial worries and health issues, is a subtle but nagging pain. Still, there was a detail of her life story that she kept hidden, even as she aged. The unspoken reality that she concealed. That one that got people asking, what exactly had Dawn Wells been guarding for those many years? During her latter years, Dawn Wells started to reveal herself, not through sensational headlines or candid interviews, but through private, emotional exchanges. She eventually gave a glimpse of how much she had carried over the years when she released a memoir, appeared at fan conventions, and gave candid interviews. What she shared was not animosity. It went beyond that. It was a desire to be acknowledged for more than simply Marianne. It was for the lady who stood behind her as well. She confided in her listeners about the toll that maintaining the innocent persona that had accompanied her for so long had taken on her. According to what Marianne remarked once, nobody wants her to get old. Barefoot, they desire her immobilized in time. Making pies while beaming. However, Dawn's youth was lost. Breakups, financial collapse, and betrayal were all things she had endured. To preserve the illusion that her devoted audience loved so much, she remained mute throughout. The mask came off of her at times. There was an interview when she implied that she would never discuss some things that occurred on set. She didn't want to ruin anyone's reputation, therefore she avoided doing anything that could bring shame upon them. Everyone has their own truth, she said quietly, and some stories do not need to be told to be understood. Fans often pressed her to speak more openly about her feud with Tina Louise or about rumored mistreatment by certain cast members, but she always demurred. She believed in loyalty, even to people who had not always shown the same courtesy. Her silence, in many ways, said more than any direct accusation ever could, and yet, there was one thing she did make clear. She never regretted playing Marianne. Despite all the personal pain, the missed paychecks, the isolation and the tension, she still saw that role as a gift. She once said, "Marianne is everything good I wish I was all the time." She gave people hope and maybe she gave me some too. Dawn Wells passed away in 2020 during a time when the world was already grieving so much. Her death made headlines. But what truly stood out was the flood of tributes from fans, fellow actors, and even those she had clashed with. They all said the same thing, that she had been kind, gracious, and deeply loved. But what no one could quite answer was this. What exactly had she kept to herself all those years? What truth did she never say out loud? Maybe we will never know. Maybe the island's biggest secret was not buried in the sand. It was carried in the heart of the woman who played Marianne,